Hi all, my name is Nikki and thanks for joining me today. Welcome to my presentation, Empathy is the Answer to Visually Impaired Students' Educational Experience, based on my paper of the same name. This topic is a huge passion of mine. I have been severely visually impaired most of my life. I lost most of my sight between the age of 13 and 16, and this is me, and this is what most of my life has looked like. I have experienced many degrees of vision loss, including blindness. I completed my senior high school years and my entire undergraduate degree as a visually impaired student. About 2 years ago, my amazing team of doctors managed to restore my sight a week before my 21st birthday, which was the best birthday present ever, and I went on to complete my postgraduate studies as a sighted student for the first time. As someone who has undertaken higher education, both as a sighted and visually impaired student, I wanted to highlight the difficulties visually impaired students face when accessing quality education. Then I'm going to provide some recommendations on how teachers can address these issues. Firstly, let's take a look at the challenges that visually impaired students face. Challenge 1, accessibility and usability of technology. Although visually impaired students can access education via assistive technology, their experience is hindered by a lack of understanding from teaching staff. This is because teachers want to use the latest cutting-edge tools whilst failing to recognise that they are creating barriers to accessibility. A visually impaired student in America sums this up nicely by stating that colleges that wouldn't dare put up a new building without wheelchair access now routinely roll out digital services that for blind people are the internet equivalent of impassable stairs. Challenge 2, social exclusion and a lack of understanding from teaching staff. Blindness and visual impairment is an incredibly lonely disability. You are isolated because of your inability to register visual cues such as smiles, nods, and gestures. And unfortunately, e-learning environments seldom include social considerations for the visually impaired. This is sad because communication from teachers and peers is vital in reducing a visually impaired student's sense of panic. One of the main issues is that teachers rarely understand the needs of visually impaired students and the challenges they face. In fact, in most cases, visually impaired students have to advocate for lecturers to meet their needs. This is an issue I experience a lot in high schools. In each of my classes, I asked my teachers if they could print off the material from the overhead projector in hard copy in a slightly bigger font size. Would any of you like to guess how many out of my 10 teachers remembered to do this? One out of my 10 teachers. The other 9 teachers routinely forgot. I would kindly remind them, but by the next class, they had forgotten about it again. So eventually, I stopped asking and would just get my friends to help me instead. However, I was and still am extremely grateful to that one teacher who always remembered. Even when she was sick, she still managed to arrange what I needed by the acting teacher. And as a result, I never got anxious in any of her classes because I knew she was doing everything she could to make my educational experience easier. Challenge 3, cognitive load theory and the spoon theory. Did you know it takes more than half your brain power to see? So I want you to imagine that you are a visually impaired person trying to see and navigate your way around life. Can you imagine how much mental energy and resilience that takes? It is like living a life of perpetual exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion when you realize it's only 9 a.m. and it feels like 9 p.m. and your mind is just this dull buzz of fatigue. The level of mental energy required to process information is known as cognitive load theory, and it is a huge issue for visually impaired students. This is because it takes visually impaired students 3 times longer to complete a task than a sighted student. Something that might seem so simple and effortless to a sighted person is actually a huge obstacle for a visually impaired student. I really like to use the spoon theory to explain this to people who may not fully understand. The spoon theory was written by Christine Miserando and is a great way of highlighting life with a disability. If you're healthy, you might not realize that life is full of choices of how much energy is needed to complete your day. This is because you have unlimited spoonfuls of energy. If you have a disability, you need to preserve your energy and plan how your spoons will be used. So for visually impaired people, you lose a spoon every time you shower, searching for the soap and shampoo and trying not to slip. You lose a spoon every time you take medication because you can't read the tiny writing on the labels, and you lose a spoon trying to connect your assistive technology to your course material, and then further spoons on how long it takes to read the material. And you lose a spoon trying to navigate your way through physical and virtual classrooms, repeatedly memorizing all the steps you have taken so you can remember your way back. And then at the end of the day, you question whether you have enough spoons to make dinner, and you wonder if you should just get takeaway. But then you remember you can't see the menu on the takeaway board, and you have lost so many spoons already on task that should in reality be so easy to someone that can see. So the question remains, how can we help visually impaired students achieve a quality educational experience? Unfortunately, there is no easy answer to this. It's really hard being visually impaired, and it's really hard being a teacher of a visually impaired student. One thing I struggle with, even after regaining my sight, is going up and down stairs. I had my last surgery 2 years ago, and I struggle so badly with stairs even to this day, and maybe I always will. Whenever I take the stairs, the steps blur together and my chest gets all tight and everything feels like it's moving, and I always feel like I'm going to fall. Stairs are a huge challenge for me, but each day at work I tackle them anyway. So as teachers, you need to ask yourself, how can I help my visually impaired student climb the stairs of higher education? Can I add handrails to the staircase or paint yellow lines on the steps to make them clearer? You need to ask yourself how you can make their educational experience as easy as possible so they can tackle their own stairs without anyone carrying them up. My first recommendation is to design an e-learning model that is based on universal design principles. I recommend the Vivid, Visually Impaired Using Virtual IT Discovery model and encourage teachers to use this framework in their course development. The model is quite holistic and includes factors such as legal requirements and standards, thus reminding teachers to ensure they are abiding by the Disability Discrimination Act and universal design initiatives. It includes social elements and acknowledges that the building of a group identity is important to visually impaired students who spend the majority of their lives in isolation because of their inability to interact with their environment. As a result, it encourages teachers to take advantage of their auditory senses by using video conferencing tools such as Zoom and Skype. The model includes accessible curriculum and stresses the fact that visually impaired students will need extra time to complete assessment and e-learning tasks due to cognitive overload. Teachers should also work in conjunction with institutional teams such as disability support services and assistive technology technicians. Throughout my research, I found there was an absence of visually impaired student voices, with many researchers valuing their ideas over the perceptions of visually impaired people. As a result, a feedback and enhancement category has been added to the model to ensure the voices of visually impaired students are heard. Learning characteristics is a huge factor in visually impaired student success and retention. Teachers need to realize that the range of visual disabilities is so diverse and that each visually impaired student has individual needs. Some students see light differently, or are colorblind, or only have peripheral vision, or some are completely blind. Therefore, teachers need to determine their learners' characteristics and history on a case-by-case basis. With this, they will be able to construct appropriate learning outcomes for their students. In the middle of the model, there is an accessible virtual classroom and accessible physical classroom section. Accessible virtual classrooms means ensuring that all e-learning tools work with assistive technology and include things such as voice-over software. Accessible physical classrooms is just as important and includes appropriate ergonomics and other tools that might aid a visually impaired person's education. One thing I am really excited about is the advent of 3D printing technology, and believe it can really transform a visually impaired student's educational experience through the power of touch. The benefit of the Vivid model is that it is designed to be integrated and reflective of course development, thus allowing visually impaired students to achieve identical outcomes to their sighted peers. My second recommendation is the promotion of the tool belt theory. The idea behind the tool belt theory is that we as humans differ. Our tasks differ, our environments differ, our circumstances differ, and we pick the appropriate tool to suit our differences. The tool belt theory argues that visually impaired students should be allowed to select technologies that best suit their disabilities, tasks, and environments. It stems from Sokal's frustration that students with disabilities were expected to use technologies in an uncompromising manner. So if your visually impaired student cannot use the discussion forum because of barriers to accessibility, let them use email instead. If we want visually impaired students to succeed in higher education, we need to allow them to pick the tools they need to get through the educational journey, instead of giving them tools they cannot use because of their disability. It is clear that visually impaired students have different educational requirements than sighted students, and there is no easy answers for teachers who have visually impaired students in their classes. However, what is known is that empathy from teaching staff was cited as the most common request from visually impaired students. Teachers need to try and understand what it is like living with a visual impairment and how challenging it can be to complete e-learning tasks with limited sight. With the spoon theory in mind, teachers have a responsibility not to rob visually impaired students of their spoons on tasks that could be eased or substituted. Instead, teachers need to realize that kindness and empathy may be the extra spoon a visually impaired student needs to make it through their day. So, I'm asking you, whether you're a teacher, a librarian, a manager, or if you just have a visually impaired person in your midst, please be the one person that remembers. Because if you are a visually impaired student and you have one teacher who understands, everything becomes a whole lot clearer. Thank you so much for your time.